Hey everybody, thanks for joining us tonight. I'd like you to make yourself comfortable and direct your attention to Robin.
Thank you for coming, everybody. Thanks for coming out. Here, Jeff Mangan, and thank you, Jeff, for making the drive over here. So Jeff is a former Montana State Senator, which most of you probably know. He's a former Commissioner of Political Practices, not holding that office right now, but was an architect of the Transparent Election Initiative with a few others. And this plan has been getting just an amazing amount of national press. And it's really something to be proud of, and it's exciting to watch. This is from an interview with Tom Moore, his name, and of course he makes the rounds. Again, what's the name of his think tank, Jeff?
He works for the Center for American Progress.
Right, and he said in this interview, neutralizing Citizens United is not mere theory. The question will be on the ballot next year in Montana. Known as the Montana Plan, the group behind the effort, the Transparent Election Initiative, says, quote, the Montana Plan, a breakthrough legal strategy, will stop corporate and dark money cold. No pressure. It's how Montanans will beat Citizen United and take back our politics. So thanks. And we haven't talked before, so I'll just ask you to, I see some news articles just within the last few days in the Free Press and the Daily Montana.
A little bit of a speed bump, but we're gonna be okay.
What's that?
A little bit of a speed bump, but we're gonna be okay.
Yeah, it sounds like it was just a procedural challenge and that's all done, so.
A little more than that, but
A
it's.
little more than that, okay. Well, you could talk to us about that.
All right, good deal.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. I don't know if do I need this microphone? Is that loud enough for everybody?
For the folks on Zoom, yes.
That's good. I hate microphones. So I'm one of those kind of guys that just likes to kind of wing it and talk, and hopefully I don't move around too much for the folks on Zoom, but for your folks, but that's just kind of who I am. So thank you so much for the invite. It's good to see a lot of old friends. I served in the Montana legislature, in the House, and the Senate from 1999 to 2006. Then I served as Montana's Commissioner of Political Practices from 2017 to 2023. So I see a lot of old friends, see a lot of new friends that I've met in the past few months. So I'm really excited to be here and appreciate the invite. I've been doing this presentation across the state and online for a while now. Changed it up a little bit. So for those of you that have seen it, thank you for coming again. It might be old hat, but you might learn some new things as well. But I'll walk through what I want for everybody. Just, we're at transparentelection.org or montanaplan.com. That's an easy one to remember. And you can email us at tei@transparentelection.org. So tonight, I kind of want to walk through, I'll do it fairly quickly because it usually takes about an hour and 15 minutes. And I want to make sure that Russell has lots of time to chat with you folks as well. Talk about the Montana Plan. I'm going to talk about why Montana. Why are we doing this in Montana? Why did I choose Montana? Well, that's pretty simple, but it's a national effort at this point, and Montana's leading the way. To talk a little bit about Montana history. I know there's some scholarly folks here that'll understand. I see my good friend Senator Doherty. I was just happy as to see him when I walked in tonight. I'm going to talk about the problem. Why are we doing this? Why is the Montana Plan necessary? I think most of you know, but we're going to talk about this, share some numbers that might just blow your mind a little bit, and then tell you what the call to action is, what we're doing, and if we have time before Mr. Cleveland, we'll take a little Q&A. So with that, I'm going to jump right in and tell you what we are doing. We're ending corporate and dark money in Montana politics. Exactly what I wanted to hear. I'm going to say how. How are we going to do that? I'm going to tell you we're going to do it by removing the power of corporations to spend in politics. And I know some of you are thinking, but Jeff, aren't the law books already filled with laws, rules, regulations already addressing corporate spending and probably a number of subsequent court rulings overturning those regulations? like Citizens United. And I'm going to say, yes, that's true, but those laws and regulations were enacted upon powers the state had already granted to corporations. And that's important. So all the regulations over the past several decades, particularly around campaign finance and disclosure, have been regulating powers the state had already granted. Montana and every other state in the union had already granted their corporations. We're going to look at it a little bit differently. It starts with the charter. So what is a corporation? Just a little kind of 101, and I apologize if I'm in folks' ways here. Corporation, if you listen to John Marshall all the way back in 1819, the Chief Justice, he said a corporation is an artificial being, invisible, intangible, and existing only in contemplation of law, possesses those properties which the charter of its creator confers upon it. Its creator in every state of the union is the state in which it resides or the state in which it was chartered. It's not chartered federally, it's chartered by each state. So it's a state power, 10th Amendment, that's important. They're artificial entities. Corporations exist only through legal recognition. They have no natural rights. They're not like you and I. I can go file tomorrow with the Secretary of State's office. In a couple of days after I spend, what is it, 15 or 30 bucks or $50, whatever it is, I have a piece of paper that says I can do all of this stuff. Basically, a natural person can. You know, it takes us at least 9 months. Corporations have limited powers. They only possess the powers granted by the state. For example, limited liability, perpetual life. They can accumulate assets. They can just distribute dividends and those type of things. And finally, they're a state creation. Each state determines which powers corporations have, and they can change them. We just haven't done it in over 100 years. State corporation law, so a little bit of history on corporation law. I'm not going to bore you to death too much. But after the original states, when they chartered corporations, you'd say the original 13 states, for example, wanted a corporation in their state, they would negotiate with the business basically, say, we'll issue you a charter, but you can only do one purpose. You can only be a railroad. You can't be a railroad and a printer. You can only be a railroad for 10 years. It's not perpetual. You can only own land within certain miles of a municipality. Those types of things. They were very specific. As we moved through, we became more states. States began competing for businesses to incorporate in their state. So when states started competing for that, what did they do? They lessened the regulation, they lessened their ability to confer powers or take powers away. So what they did was eventually by the mid 1800s, that every state in the union issued general corporation powers to all corporations that incorporate in their state. So if you incorporate in Montana, for example, your charter says you have all general powers, and the courts have recognized that to mean all powers of you and I. But what we never gave up was the ability to go back and change those original powers in corporations. States retained that right. We just haven't done it in 100 and some years. Why is it important? Rights versus powers. Rights, the right to do something exists from the power the state provided them. So humans are born with inherent powers and rights. Corporations are only granted the powers that the states give them. The states can define and limit corporate powers, and rights only attach to the powers states give them. So when we talk about corporation personhood and corporations have the same free speech rights that you and I do, it's because the courts have looked at those general powers to say, yep, that's what they intended. The state intended for them to have the same powers as you and I. So we're simply going to take away the power to spend in politics. They don't have that power to spend in politics. That right doesn't exist. So if we take the power away, that right just disappears. So states can keep corporate money out of politics. Each state creates its corporations. Doesn't mean we need to let it consume us. And there's 3 ways we can do this. And we've labeled ours the Montana Plan. I think all the other states, to be honest with you, are probably gonna call it the Montana Plan too. The Montana Plan just sounds good, you know? Ohio, it's not, you know, it never sound good, we're gonna do the Ohio Plan. But I can guarantee you, in Ohio, the Montana Plan, so it sounds pretty damn good. So how states can act. Between the corporation statutes and the Constitution, every state's law contains 3 provisions that provide the tools necessary to keep corporations out of elections. 1, the power to alter or revoke. Every state's laws clearly state that the state can alter or revoke its corporation law at any time for any reason, including Montana. Universal application. Every change in a state's corporation laws applies to existing corporations as well as new corporations. So it affects everyone that's currently incorporated in Montana and anybody new that incorporates here. And finally, out-of-state provisions, and this is key. Out-of-state corporations can only exercise the powers granted to them through each state's charters. So if a state wants to do business in Montana, they do so by becoming a foreign corporation for that state. So foreign just meaning anything outside of the state. So it doesn't mean outside the United States. So if a business from Wyoming wants to do business in Montana, they have to file as a foreign corporation to do that. When they do that, they agree to follow our corporate laws and our business. So it not only affects, when we pass this in Montana, it not only affects the spending of Montana corporations' politics, every other corporation around the United States won't be able to spend in Montana politics either. They can still spend in their own state, in other states, until other states do this. But initially, Montana will be the only one corporate dark money free, or at least that's the hope. So we are taking, and so what we're doing, and I used to do this a little bit, it takes a little bit long, but I have a bunch of sticky notes on with all these powers. And so I made it into a slide. So basically, of all the corporate powers that we currently give a corporation, we're just simply taking one off the board, the power to spend in politics. So we're not regulating the current power, we're removing the power that corporations currently have to spend in politics. With that power, with the power no longer in place, the right attached to it no longer exists, making Citizens United irrelevant in the state of Montana. So what that means is that we're not overturning Citizens United, it's just moot. It doesn't apply to Montana because our corporations can't spend in politics. As simple as that. So yes, there will be legal challenges. We know as soon as this passes in Montana that it will be, we will be sued, it'll be enjoined, and we'll be in a long legal battle, which is what we want because we want to make this law. But we have a couple of different things in our favor. Federalism, corporation law is state law. It's protected by the 10th Amendment. We've heard a lot about the 10th Amendment, particularly this last year, between AI and other states' rights issues. People are starting to understand that there's more than just the First Amendment. There's some really important amendments and a lot of others too because of what's going along nationally. But for our purposes, the 10th Amendment is where it's at. Separation of powers, courts can strike down laws, but they can't create them. So remember, we're taking away a power. The court can't say, well, you have to give that power back, you have to write that in. They basically have an eraser for laws that states have already provided. They don't have a pen, they can't write it in and say, nope, you have to allow Montana to spend in elections. You can't do that. Interstate commerce is not violated when domestic and foreign corporations are treated equally. Like I said, we're treating foreign corporations the same as we're treating Montana corporations and vice versa. If it only affected Montana corporations, we'd be in trouble. But it doesn't. It affects everybody the same. And finally, unconstitutional conditions, it's not applicable as the incorporators surrender no rights. And I'm not an attorney, by the way, so don't ask me any of the legal questions, but I'd be happy to get them to our attorneys to answer those for you if you have them just by emailing us. So, we've got plenty of time. So let's talk about why Montana. From the Copper Kings to Citizens United, Montana has a very unique history of battling corporate influence and corruption for over a century. And we've affected campaign finance law, not only in Montana, but across the United States. So when I did this presentation in Butte, actually Mr. Cleveland was in Butte. A friend of mine, Evan Barrett, who's worked for a couple of administrations, he's kind of a Butte historian. He talks about the Copper Collar and the Copper Kings in a presentation that he does about the 1972 Constitution. So when I knew I was going to Butte, I said, Evan, I'd love you to lead the history part of this. I'm just going to turn the presentation over to you. And he said, well, that's great, Jeff. I'd love to do that. So I showed up, and Evan shows up, and he pulls out his USB. He goes, okay, here are my slides. So we ended up having to put his slides in, which is just fine. He did a wonderful job. But I saved this slide as kind of a nod to Mr. Barrett, because it's one of my favorite slides. I didn't have this particular image on anything, but it's an image that many Montanans recognize. The coils of the coils of the snake wrapping itself around the state of Montana, squeezing the life out of Montana, and that's how Montanans and citizens looked at the Anaconda Copper Company in the early 1900s. So I saved this slide and incorporated it into my presentation with his permission. So let's talk a little bit about the Copper Kings and the Copper Kings era without getting too much into the history. Late 1800s, late 1890s into the 1900s, there was corporate domination, corruption at the highest level. Montana experienced a period of extreme corporate domination, primarily centered around mining interests. So you have Mr. Clark wanting to be a senator around a mining company. And he wanted to be a senator so badly that he literally bribed Montana legislators in the early 1900s to send him to Washington. Because remember, back then, our legislature selected our senators and sent them to Washington. The people didn't vote on who your senator was. So he literally spent around $400,000, which is around a couple of $1 million in today's money, bribing Montana legislators to send him to Washington, and he was successful. They did. They took the money and they bribed for him to go. At the same time, the Anaconda Company was basically had its own little monopoly around Butte and the mining operations around Butte. And a gentleman by the name of Heinze was a competitor of the Anaconda Company, and he was very upset that the Anaconda Company had this monopoly in Butte. But Mr. Heinze also had money. And what Mr. Heinze decided to do, he couldn't bribe legislators because they were already taken care of by Clark and others. He bribed the judges in Butte. He bribed the judges in Butte to rule in his favor on issues that gave him more mining interest in Butte. That's kind of a quick synopsis of it. And basically took a lot of the Anaconda Company's work out of Butte, money right out of the Anaconda Company's pockets. The Anaconda Company did not like that. And so what the Anaconda Company did was went to the legislature and said, if you don't take care of those judges in Butte and pass laws that say that they're wrong, we're going to shut down our operation in the state of Montana. In 1903, shutting that down. That might sound like kind of a veiled threat now, but think about it. In 1903, the Anaconda Company employed 4 out of every 5 Montanans. So either through mining, but it also controlled the media, newspaper. It controlled timber interests. It controlled transportation. It literally controlled 4/5 of Montana's economy. The legislature and the governor at that time said, no, it's a veiled threat. They're not going to do anything. They're not going to do that. Guess what they did? They did it. They shut everything down. In 1903, Anaconda shut down its operations, putting 4/5 of Montana's workforce out of work. So it forced the governor to call a special session, forced the legislature basically to acquiesce to the Anaconda Company, and they passed a law that basically overturned the ruling of those judges in Butte that got the Anaconda Company what they wanted. So when they did that, national recognition of what was happening, national media took notice. It looks like there's no real governing power in Montana. The real governing power is the Amalgamated Copper Company, which was the Anaconda Company. It demonstrated several crucial points. A single corporation could effectively shut down an entire state's economy, and it did. Judicial corruption, the corruption of the judicial system really led to that economic shutdown because they were corrupted. And economic leverage, Anaconda Company's diverse operations across the state gave it that unprecedented leverage over the entire political system. So Montanans and citizens saw exactly what was going on. They were affected. They were out of work. They saw a couple of things happening. They saw the shutdown. They saw Montana's economy going to the tank. They knew that William Clark was buying his Senate seat, and bought his Senate seat. And basically, we just had enough, and started working on several attempts to get power in the hands of the people, in the hands of the citizens. And they worked through from the late 1890s through the middle of 1905, and finally in 1906, they were able to get initiative and referendum power through their constitution, then through the legislature in 1906. Then they spent the next 6 years focusing on a couple of things: direct primaries, direct election of senators, and a little bill called the Corrupt Practices Act. And they were able to put the Corrupt Practices Act on the ballot in 1912. And it basically banned corporate contributions. It banned corporate money in elections. It limited campaign spending, set strict caps on election expenditures. And it basically worked to eliminate corporate influence. It really was the citizens' bill to eliminate corporate influence on Montana politics. And it passed in 1912, along with the 4 other initiatives. It passed 76%. And keep that number in mind because it's important, because I'm going to refer to it again as we go through a little bit more history. So not only in 1912 did they pass the Corrupt Practices Act, they also passed the direct primary law. They also passed direct election of senators. Basically, we were the first to do that before it happened a few years later at the federal level. Montana passed a bill that allowed Montanans to vote on their senators, and that vote was who the legislature had to send as our senators. We were the first to do that. And then a couple of other presidential preference primary and the direct primary. There's also a referendum. I can't remember exactly what the referendum took away, but they were 5 out of 5. They were very successful. So what happened because of that work by citizens in the early years of Montana? Face-to-face campaigning, personal connection is valued. That's when citizens activism really took hold. We saw limits on party loyalty. When citizens did this, it wasn't a Democratic or Republican effort. It was a Montana citizens effort, and that's very important. It showed the importance of grassroots activism. Montana, starting in the early 1900s, began this tradition of citizen-led political movements. And finally, we have a very healthy skepticism of outside interests. I think we still do. It may not be as healthy as it used to be, but I think we're still smart enough to know when someone's pulling the wool over our eyes. So, the reforms established a tradition of grassroots activism and helped shape Montana's unique political culture that exists through today. So, let's jump a bunch of years to 1972 and the new Constitution. But before we do that, just one simple question. Lots of things happened between 1912 and the passage of the Corrupt Practices Act. And in this period of time, we had a World War, we had a Second World War, we had a Korean conflict, we had a Vietnam War, we had a Great Recession, we had a Great Depression, we had a number of things happen. Do you know what didn't happen between 1912 and let's just say today? Or let's say 2012 to get there? Know what didn't happen when the Corrupt Practices Act passed? We didn't have a bunch of businesses flee the state of Montana because, they told us we couldn't spend in elections anymore. And I just say that because you may hear that when this gets off the ground later this fall. There's going to be this, it's going to affect all these businesses. They're all going to want to leave Montana because they can't spend in elections. We had 100 years of no corporate money in elections, and we did just fine, and our economy was just fine. So I just like to point that out when we talk about history, because people forget we did allow corporation spending in elections through Citizens United. So in 1972, without getting into the history of that, lots of good folks, Upper Seven Law, other folks, Governor Roscoe at the Mansfield Center has done some really good work talking about Montana's 1972 Constitution. But it's important to us because it enhanced the ability for citizen democracy with statutory and referenda, citizens taking the ballot, but it also added the ability of Montanans to directly amend the Constitution. We didn't have that until the 1972 Constitution. So they added that in. They strengthened the ability to do statutory initiatives, and they added the ability for Montana citizens, ordinary citizens like you and I, to say, we have a good idea. We want to try to amend our Constitution. And we started after that, and we started again on some campaign finance stuff. In 1996, we passed Initiative 125, which basically enhanced, answered the question, should corporations be able to spend in ballot initiatives? We said no, we didn't. We thought we had that power all along, but we put it into law in 1996, passed with 52% of the vote. It was later challenged under First Amendment grounds, invalidated in the year 2000 in the Montana Chamber of Commerce versus Argenbright, who was Montana's Commissioner of Political Practices at the time. But we passed it, again, leading the way campaign finance reform. Then the big dog happened, Citizens United. So what is Citizens United, really quickly? Citizens United was a C4 group, a C4 nonprofit group, who was promoting a film against a national candidate, and it wasn't allowed to do that during that election year because it was viewed as political spending. So they sued to say that they had the right, the First Amendment right to have that speech. And that's where the Citizens United came from. Citizens United is simply just the name of a nonprofit. But it was the case that changed the politics. They sued to promote a film. They took it all the way to the Supreme Court. And in 2010, Supreme Court ruled 5-4 that government cannot restrict independent political expenditures by corporations. And this is where we all think that Citizens United really means what they said was it gave personhood to corporations. And that's kind of what it did, but they really didn't say that in the law. But what they did say should even scare you even more. And this is what I want you to remember if you remember anything out of this about Citizens United. What they did say was independent political spending by corporations cannot be corrupting. Affirmative, cannot be corrupting. They wrote that in. And they went one step further, not only said that it cannot be corrupting, they said it cannot even give the appearance of corruption. That's what Citizens United is. That's what the ruling was. They said independent political spending cannot be corrupting. I could go through, we can all think of times since 2010, example after example of something that you would think is corrupting, or you would think it certainly gives the appearance of corruption, but that was the ruling of the Supreme Court. And everybody, the folks like myself and others that were involved in campaign finance were at the interest of this, and oh my God, this is going to be horrible. And then people, you're saying the sky is going to fall, it's not going to happen. What's happened since 2010? We'll talk about that in a minute. So the impact is that corporations can now spend unlimited amounts on elections as long as it's not coordinated with candidates. We'll talk about that in a minute. But remember, they said that independent spending by corporations cannot be corrupting. Oh, goodness gracious. So Montana in 2010 still had the Corrupt Practices Act of 1912 in our back pocket. So it didn't affect Montana yet because we had a law that said, that challenged that. And sure enough, as soon as Citizens United passed, a group called Western Tradition Partnership sued the state of Montana to say that the Corrupt Practices Act was unconstitutional because of the Citizens United rule. And Montana fought that. And when it fought that to the court, the Montana Supreme Court and the Supreme Court, they said that, we have a unique history of corporate corruption. I just gave you a little snippet of it a few minutes ago. Because of what happened way back in 1912. We have a state interest in preventing corruption. We have lots of factual distinctions from other states, including our population, our size, etc. And what we did do was a minimal burden on free speech. And we won in the Montana Supreme Court, but we lost at the U.S. Supreme Court. And the U.S. Supreme Court, an American Tradition Partnership, picked up the mantle from Montana, or from the Western Tradition Partnership. They took it to the Supreme Court and we lost. But Justice Breyer did say, and I picked this up here because it goes back to that corruption piece, he agreed with Montana and 3 other justices that independent expenditures by corporations did in fact lead to corruption and the appearance of corruption in Montana. So not only did it happen then, he was basically saying, it's going to happen again because it can happen in one state and it can happen in others. So what happened after Citizens United? Floodgates opened. Corporate union spending in elections was tightly limited. Afterwards, unlimited spending became legal. Super PACs did not exist before Citizens United. So independent expenditures, that uncoordinated political spending by super PACs, have increased more than 2,800% from 2008 2024. I'll show you a slide here in just a second exactly what that looks like. Dark money exploded through C4s. We'll talk about that a little bit in a minute as well. And the coordination loophole, spending remains legal as long as it's not coordinated with a campaign. We'll talk. That just means basically, in layman's terms, that with Russell, I won't, I'm just being bad to use this an example, but Senator Doherty, if I was a corporation or wanted to spend independently, I couldn't sit down with Senator Doherty and say, listen, Senator, you spend all your money on education-related advertisements, and we'll take care of public lands-related advertisements. So you don't have to spend your money there. Hint, wink, wink. So that's illegal. That's coordination. You can't do that. I'll tell you the reason why it doesn't really matter anymore in a minute. So why it still matters? We talked about the top 3, but the things that matter to you and I as citizens. Voters struggle to identify who funds political messaging or what influence they're purchasing. Every day there's an example of it. I don't need to tell you. And finally, the decision shifted power from the public, from you and I, to special interests with the deepest pockets. You can't open a newspaper or a national publication and not hit you in the face every single election cycle. They don't care about what you think. I hate to say it. Sorry, Russell. I know Russell does. The electorate. They care about what the money thinks. Russell's got the right idea because he supports the Montana plan and was one of the first ones to do it. So I'm glad he's here tonight. But the public is lost in all of this with all this money out there. And you know it, you see it every day. Even the folks that want to say, no, it really doesn't happen, they know too. They're just lying to you, in my opinion. Montana's response, really quick. So Montana, again, we're leading in all of this. We don't like people to tell us what to do, and we know BS when we see it. After Citizens United passed, and they struck down the Corrupt Practices Act, we took I-166 to the ballot that basically said, in response to Citizens United, that corporations are not people and that our elected officials need to do everything in their power to overturn Citizens United. That was basically the policy statement of I-166. Guess what? They passed 75% of the vote in 2012. 76% 1912, 75% 2012. And I'll end with a slide soon, I'll tell you what you guys think about this kind of plan today. And guess what? It's around the same number. But it's largely symbolic, it's still on the books, it's right there, if you go to 1335-501, the law is still on the books that you passed. But it's basically just a policy statement that says Montana does not like the fact that corporations have the same rights as people, and you need to do something about it. Darn it. So, people are gonna do something about it finally. But it's still in the book. So let's talk about where this independent expenditure money's happening, all this money that cannot be corrupting language that the court said. So this chart starts at 1990. 1990. So you go all the way back here, this line is still the same, to 1889 if you wanted to. And it's flat line all the way to 2008. I selected 2008 so I compare apples to apples, because that was a federal presidential election year, 2008. In 2008, nationwide election, independent expenditure spending was $143 million nationwide. In 2024, a short, 12 years later, $4.21 billion. Again, 1889 over there, flat all the way to 2008, and then straight up. Straight up. It's 2,800% plus increase. These numbers aren't fake, they're not real, and somebody create for this. That's exactly what the facts are. That's what's happened in the last 15 years. What about Montana, Jeff? Okay, let's talk about Montana. Same thing, all the way back to 1889 to zero. 2008, just the election year of the Senate race that year. I was doing Senate race that year with Senator Max Baucus. I hate to even say it. We spent $33,000 in independent expenditures. Oh my God, how embarrassing. That's a little tiny amount. Guess what, how much they spent in the senator and the Sheehy tester race 2024?
Yeah.
$180 million. That's a 5,000% increase plus. Again, the same thing, flat all the way to Citizens United and then up. And it's going to continue to go up nationally and at state level. Talk about coordination. I can't coordinate because I don't want the good senator to know what I'm spending money on. So we just go back a couple of months ago, September 1st, 2025, the article in the New York Times, Silicon Valley Corporation's investors have pledged $200 million to two new super PACs aimed at forcing out politicians who they see as insufficiently supportive of AI. Now, this isn't a conversation about AI, this is just what they say. They don't have to coordinate with Senator Doherty. They're telling him right here. They announce it to everybody. We don't need coordination, for goodness sake. We just go to the papers and shout it from the rooftops. So if you don't want us to spend all of this money, this is just two super PACs. There's a hell of a lot more than two super PACs with hundreds of millions of dollars putting money into our elections. They just go out and tell you. They don't need to coordinate. They would probably know what coordination means in 2026. Anyway, now I'm getting excited. So, in October, issue 1 with using YouGov did a poll on whether or not the American citizens agree with the Supreme Court's ruling that large independent expenditures by corporations and elections give rise to corruption or the appearance of corruption. And 79% of the people agreed that yes, it's corrupt. Of course, that's what it means. You know why? Because we're not dumb. We can see it each and every day. Goodness. So our plan is the Montana plan. And this is an old slide. I didn't have a chance to update it. I don't know why. I did update it. I don't know why this one is still here. So we filed the Montana plan way back in August. But I'm going to skip that because we got to start it all over again. And I'll talk about that in just a second. I'm still doing okay on time. So what we started the Montana plan, what we're doing is we're going around and we're putting the Montana plan on the ballot. And we're asking folks to share their voice to coordinate locally. We have over 100 volunteers in Missoula alone already that we've worked with over the last several months. We're asking Montanans to once again lead reform like we did in the early 1900s, like we did in the 1970s, like we did in the 1990s, and like we did in 2012. We're going to do it again in 2022. And I want you to help us create a legacy for our kids and our grandkids that we can be proud of, that folks like this young man can carry on his mantle as he goes forward in his political career. And I was lucky to meet him in Great Falls a few months ago. So, small world. I love Montana. So I get to walk in and I see Senator Doherty and old friends and people I just met. It's wonderful. So what I need you to do is I need you to share your voice to get this on the ballot. Let me tell you where we're at. So apparently that slide didn't get in there. So we were convinced that our constitutional initiative would pass constitutional muster, but only required the one vote. It was found legally insufficient by the Attorney General. We appealed that decision. We were confident that the Supreme Court would agree with us, and we were wrong. They agreed with the Attorney General. So we knew that there was one of two things that was going to happen with that appeal, that they were either going to agree with us or they weren't. So we were prepared, if they didn't agree with us, that we would refile, and based on what they said in their decision, we would craft the constitutional initiative to what we believe they said in their opinion, which we did, but we also drafted a statutory initiative to put on the ballot as well. So we have two things moving across basically for one reason. It is January 14th. Signatures are due June 19th. It would have been a significant effort to get 60,000 signatures to get this on the ballot for our work between January and June. Now that timeline is going to be truncated to basically, if we're lucky, if the stars and the time and the stars in the court and the AG align, at the earliest, we'll be able to begin collecting signatures, if we're lucky, around April 1st. But it may be May 15th. It may be June 1st, or it may be after June 19th. We don't know. We're hoping it's going to be one of those earlier dates. We put both on there to hedge our bets in a sense. They both get the thing accomplished that allows Montanans to vote on whether or not we want corporate dark money in our elections. I think most of us say we don't. And this is the best way, the best chance that we have, so we won't have another bite of the apple this year to get something on the ballot. So we're hopeful that we will be able to make that decision early in April or the end of March, April. And you will be voting, or we will be collecting signatures for one or the other. People keep asking me, well, both pass, and I keep saying, or both are found sufficient. And I said, that's a good problem for me to have, and I'll make that decision when it happens. But I would be asking you to collect signatures on one of those initiatives. I just can't tell you which one yet. My preference is the constitutional initiative. If that's the case, it's a huge lift because it requires 60,000 signatures. The statutory initiative only requires 30,000 signatures, so it'll be a bit easier. But the constitutional, through the Constitution, is a much stronger and more effective for what we want as we move forward. So I want you to share your voice and tell your friends. Ask your friends this, just whether you've seen them or not, know them or not, neighbors, friends, whether they're R's or D's or left or right or rich or poor, whatever they might be, ask them one simple question. Do you think there's too much money in politics? And I can guarantee you, they will say yes. They may not agree on what the solution is, but they will agree yes, because they see the same thing we see each and every day. All this money being poured in and us losing our voice. So right away, you already have agreement on something. And then you can say, well, let me tell you about the Montana Plan. Go to montanaplan.com, learn about it, help me get it on the ballot. Let us know what, we'll let you know what you can do. Be ready to sign the petition when it's ready. And it's one of those issues I truly believe can bring Democrats and Republicans together in this era that we don't like to agree on anything. This is one of those things that can do it. So one of the ways we're going to do it here through your phone is the next 3 months, I'm not going to sit on my hands and wait for the court or the AG to tell me which things I need to have signed. I'm going to ask Montanans to tell me that they want to sign this when it becomes ready for signature. So I want you to go to the website, go to this QR code, there's a little form there, let us know, and as soon as the ink is dried on that printing, and we know, we're going to be contacting you to tell you where to go in Missoula to sign this petition. So we're not going to sit on our hands, we're going to queue you up, basically. This just went live this week. We're kind of pushing it out this week and next. But if we're going to tackle this differently, we're going to ask Montanans, because I think you agree with me that it's important enough to do, that you will tell us that, yes, Mangan, when it's ready, I will sign it. Just let me know, and I will tell you everything, just so you know, and you can tell your friends and neighbors this. Any data we collect on this website is not used for anything else but to tell you when that petition is ready to sign. We're not going to use it for fundraising. We're not going to use it for any other purpose. We're just going to use it to reach out to you to say, head down to wherever we're at on this date and sign the petition, because it's that important that we get it on the ballot. That site also will tell you how to use the My Voter portal to make sure your election information is up to date. And if you're not a registered voter in Montana, it will tell you how to register to vote in Montana. So it does 3 basic things, and that's all it does. You can go to our other site to learn about everything else and contribute and everything if you like, but not at this page. So with that, help coordinate locally. Got a great team here. I love Missoula. This is like the 3rd time I've been back. And we'll be back. We're going to bring back the film Dark Money, the documentary that showed Montana between 2012 since Citizens United and 2015 the passage of the Disclose Act. We're going to rescreen that to get people's juices flowing again about what Montana can do. And that's going to be, I believe, on March 1st at the library. We're still putting the I's and T's on that. And then we'll have a little Q&A about that as well. Let's see, where am I at? Lead reform, I've already said you guys are willing to do that. Legacy, that's why it's important. I have 2 new grandkids about that age, a 2.5-year-old and a 1-year-old. And that's the reason I'm doing what I'm doing. So now, who can spend in Montana politics? Corporations and individuals. After the Montana plan, it really is this simple. The only folks that can spend in Montana politics are individuals. Oh, and where are we at for support? We had 76 in 1912 and 75 in 2012. In 2025, 74% of Montanans, when they were talked about the Montana plan through the YouGov poll, said they would support it. I like those numbers. That's it. I can turn it over to Russell. I'll be glad to answer questions if I can.
Yeah, you're fine for time.
Okay.
I just have one question. One of the things that most people don't talk about is foreign influence and super PACs and things like that. Can you address some of that? Because a lot of us think it's just a narrative that everything's on. Can you address some of that?
It's not my field of expertise, but you're absolutely correct. There is a number there. That's part of the problem with disclosure and so much money flowing into these PACs and super PACs. Is we can't keep up with it, and we don't know who's spending it. And these multinational corporations that might have a presence in the United States are truly, centered in other parts of the world. So you're absolutely right. The Montana plan basically eliminates super PACs from spending in Montana.
Yep.
So that's the important part of all that. Doesn't matter where they're going to be, they're not going to be able to do it here. But let me talk about, before I forget, I kind of squeezed, I meant to talk about it really quick. Dark money in C4s. The beauty of the Montana plan is it treats everybody the same. For-profit corporations, S-corps, C-corps, LLCs, etc., nonprofits, C3s, which shouldn't be spending in the first place, C4s, unions, associations. And it's those last couple that really have people upset at me because I'm doing this. And I say people, I say leaderships of those folks. So let me just say, there are very good C4s. They're very good. There are C4s doing very good work, many of which I support and will continue to support. But since Citizens United, C4s have become the conduit and the main conduit for dark money to enter our elections. There's no debate about that. It just is. If someone wants to remain anonymous and doesn't want their name attached to money they're putting in elections, they give it to a C4, and the C4 writes that check from their corporate treasury to the super PAC or to the political action committee. And then when that money is disclosed, it's disclosed with the name of the C4, not the underlying money next to it. So it's just, and good C4s have had to follow the same rules as everyone else, have gotten into that. So when I announce this, you will be surprised to know I have not got one donation or one endorsement of support from a C4 organization yet, or union yet. But I've had very good conversations with them. We had conversations nationally and locally, practically every day. Just had a text before I got here, as a matter of fact, a conversation we're having with a very major C4 organization nationally that disagrees with what they're doing because that's how business is done now. But in order to stop dark money, we have to take care of the C4 problem. And I simply say, I want C4s to go back to the way they did business before Citizens United, before 2010, be the best damn social welfare organization you can be. You can still do everything you're doing now. You just can't write a check from your corporate treasury into a campaign. And if you want to raise money to support an issue or a candidate through independent expenditures, you can start a PAC as a C4 and have a separate account and take individual contributions and make those transparent and disclosed, and that's the way you continue the work that you're doing. And guess what? Practically every member of the rank and file of a union, every member of a C4 organization, that's not necessarily leadership, agree with me. And they're signing up to be supporters, they're signing up to sign a petition, they're signing up to be volunteers, because they, like you, like I, know that's how we get rid of dark money and corporate money out of this, and we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. We did it before 2010, we can do it again. It's not the death of C4s. Bad C4s, maybe they'll go away, which is just fine with me. Good C4s, that good social welfare work will continue, and you'll continue to support them. You'll just do it in a different way. Okay, we wanted to get that in. So where was it?
What would be the impact on independent expenditures from C4s?
Exactly that. They couldn't write a check from their corporate treasury. They would have to create a separate PAC and raise money independently of their regular work. But they could still lobby. They can still all do those other type of political things. They just wouldn't be able to support or oppose a candidate or a ballot issue like they do now.
So could like a PAC form and then still make independent expenditures?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, and I guess, so the independent expenditures would have no, so the thing is targeting is like the connection between the company and the independent expenditures?
Correct. The corporation would be able to write a check from but they could certainly create their own PAC with their own account and disclose their individual contributors and support them. They just won't be able to write a check from their corporate treasury.
Gotcha.
Just like a union will. And unions today basically have had that rule in Montana for a long time for candidates. If they want to support candidates in any meaningful way, they have to have a separate PAC and raise that money separately from their campaign treasury. So where we differ is that they've been involved in a lot of ballot issues and have gotten used to writing checks out of their corporate treasury and not the PAC's treasury. So just a different way of doing business. So other questions? Good questions, by the way. There's got to be more questions there.
I know you're not a lawyer, but I'm still trying to figure out how you're gonna. I can see these corporations and a C corporation, S corp, whatever form of legal entity it takes. But couldn't they just say that I'm a legal person per this ruling? I'm now a legal person, I same standing as a natural person. Couldn't they just put their influence through that way? You talk about PACs writing checks.
Yeah, they could, thank you, but what it doesn't do is, in one of the first questions I was ever asked on this is, well, billionaires will still be able to write a check if they want to. And, you know, a director of a corporation can still write a check if they want to, out of their own personal funds, et cetera. And I say, yes, the difference is now would be transparent and disclosed. And that's important. We just go back to whose influence are they purchasing? Do you know whose influence? And I just kind of go back to the Wisconsin's Supreme Court race of early 2024, when Mr. Musk was very vocal about him putting his own money into supporting certain candidates in that race. So people knew who was spending money in that race, or at least a good portion of it. And they made a decision based on that because they had all of the facts and the transparency in front of them, or at least most of it. Or certainly most enough to make a decision on whether or not his influence was important enough for them to change their vote, which it wasn't. But it was disclosed, and they knew who was spending the election. So it's not going to stop anybody. Whoever wants to write that huge check and make independent expenditures to a PAC, they can, or to a ballot issue, they can. The only difference is you're going to know it. And that's not a bad thing. I'd rather know who's spending in it than it going having, they feel so uncomfortable that, you know, because they don't want their name attached to it, they have to go to find a C4 for the C4 to direct it to a PAC. I mean, there must be a reason. So anyway, but it's a good question. So.
My dad had a note above his desk that said, "I'll believe a corporation is a person when Texas executes one." Have you heard that one before?
Well, I have now. So, no, Montanans only have to go back to 2012, because that's exactly what we said in 2012 when the ruling first came out, or at least 75% of us said that. They said, that's ridiculous. Corporations aren't people, and we're telling you they're not people, and we put it in our law that they're not people. So we've known that for at least, 14 years. So maybe others are just catching up to that fact. It's just common sense. Corporations didn't grow on trees way back when they first started. They didn't hand Ben Franklin his charter for his printing company, and Ben Franklin, oh goody, I get to go spend all this money in elections now. Clearly it didn't happen. Montana's back in our initial constitution and our initial corporate laws never envisioned corporations doing this, at least to the extent they're doing today. And when they did see that they were doing it, they rose up and told them that's BS. And we agreed with them for all of these years. So we know, Montana's know, we have the legacy to know, and I'm in Russell's time, and thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Jeff, for doing great work, and we're interested in following how this progresses. Thank you so much for being here.